Got it. Okay. Hi, I'm Sara Kooperman. I'm the CEO of SCW Fitness Education and WATERinMOTION and the new Seat Fitness program, seatfitness.com. We're doing it for older adults. Very cool. I see wonderful people. Kathy, Joyce, May, Becky, Nan. I got a couple Kathys in here. Jackie, Rose. Love this. Thank you guys for joining me. Hi, Meg. We have some great people with us tonight. I'm really excited about this. We're going to be talking about range of motion, what you need to know. And we've got, how do we personalize movement to accommodate various bodies and range of motion? Is it possible someone will never be able to do certain movements? Is inflexibility a bad thing? Can we be too flexible? We're going to look at different techniques, the impacts on the range of motion, performance change, blah, blah, all in 45 minutes. I know it's a little bit insane, but we've got some great people with us tonight. We've got the fabulous Andrea Metcalf. Yeah, we know it's her because, there we go. And she's a best-selling author and celebrity fitness expert with over 35 years of experience. She started when she was 8 years old in the fitness industry. She's made hundreds of media appearances from NBC to Oprah.com. She's a certified personal trainer. She's a group fitness instructor. She's co-founder of Onyx International, and she's launching this really cool new Pilates machine with a patent pending. I don't know. It's got double springs. Anything with double springs, it has my heart. We've also got Demetrius Hill. Love Demetrius. This guy is a fabulous presenter, great person. He's got a master's in healthcare administration. He's also a certified personal trainer from the Cooper Institute. He's developed teacher training programs in 16 different countries while he was based in Germany for 8 years. And he's a professor in Southern California, and he teaches health science and business administration. We love that. And then we have Pete McCall, who is absolutely one of my favorite presenters, and he's such an incredible educator. He works with Core Health and Fitness. He works with ACE. He works with NASM. He's also a coach for the Coastal Dragons Rugby Club. Okay, he has not danced on MTV. Demetrius has danced on MTV. Andrea wants to dance on MTV. Okay, anyway, he is also the host of a fabulous podcast that I actually have been on. It's all about fitness. I highly recommend you guys listen in on it. And he's the author of articles and chapters and textbooks and books on his own. And of course, he's got, there we go, Ageless Intensity. So I am so excited about having these folks on. And I'm going to start with you, Pete. Flexibility, mobility, stability, range of motion. How does it all fit together, or does it even all fit together?
No, well, first of all, thank you for having me here, Sara, and thanks to Demetrius and Andrea for being here and for everybody for joining us. Because, this can be somewhat confusing. The way I look at it is joints have a range of motion, and joints can be flexible, and joints will move to what they're structurally designed to do. But it's the tissue, it's the muscle and connective tissue that's what's called extensible. They can either lengthen or shorten. So it's a combination of the range of motion of the structure and the extensibility of the tissue that allows for mobility. So that's a long way to answer the fact that they kind of all go together, but I prefer to look at it as mobility because the other stuff can be transitory, can shift from day to day.
And what I like is that you said day to day. So we were talking about, before we turned the camera on, we were talking about, what was the term you used when somebody's hips were
gunked up, when they were gunked up.
Yeah, you guys, if you need to Google that term like I did, it's very technical. It's only if you have a master's degree will you understand it. But Pete, you were talking about you connect with your clients and make sure you understand what they've done the day before, what their aspirations are. How do you do this?
Well, I think a lot of instructors do this of where during a warm up, you just kind of watch people. And if you if you use consistent warm-up exercises, I try to be relatively consistent in my warm-up routine, partly for the rehearsal effect, but partly because that's where you can tell. And what I mean by gunked up is if I see your squat shifting a little bit today, whereas it normally doesn't, maybe that's because you did a couple hours of yard work yesterday, or maybe that's because you got stuck in an awkward position for a meeting for a period of time, and muscles are a little bit sore. If muscles are sore, they're going to affect the range of motion. So I learned the term gunked up from Gary Gray, who's a lot smarter than I am when it comes to biomechanics, but it just means that a joint is not going to work the way it's designed to or intended to.
That's interesting. Andrea, when you work with your clients, how do you balance between stability and flexibility?
Well, I mean, they go hand in hand, and just kind of to riff off of Pete a little bit, when I see my client actually walking in, I can normally tell just from years of looking at that gait analysis how their body's feeling. And then as they're going through their warm up, just like you said, you'll notice something doesn't turn the right way when they're doing a rotational pattern, or they may be stepping funny into the arch of their foot. And so when we talk about stability, those muscles, the smaller muscles, are the ones that typically are the weaker, tighter muscles. And so those tightnesses I look at and I go for the strength patterns against them, because flexibility isn't just about stretching the tissue, it's about strengthening the opposing joint to allow for movement. I kind of think of it as like, if I try and bend forward, but my hamstrings and glutes aren't strong enough to counterbalance the quads, that hip doesn't want to go anywhere. It's going to hold on to it, and it's going to stop that range of motion. As this hamstring gets stronger, it's going to allow this to move more freely. And so it's really about a synergistic relationship, if you will, of the muscles around the joint, that they all have to have their proper tension.
Yeah, I remember in getting certified in personal training, one of the most important aspects of flexibility is balance strength. And I always share with people that I've had several knee surgeries, and the focus on the hamstring, not just flexibility, but also strength, has been a strong force in at least hopefully preventing a number of surgeries. You guys, that are on the webinar watching, if you do move your mouse and you see the green share button at the bottom of the screen, go to the left and click on that chat box, and you're welcome to ask questions. I love to know where you guys are from. We love to know if you've got any specific questions or any injuries or any comments that you have. We love to hear from you. Sean Senegan, who's our creative director at SCW, he's running the chat box. He's a little frightening, so I recommend please contribute. Demetrius, what is your thoughts on balancing flexibility with stability?
Well, thanks for having me, Sara. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad everyone showed up. It's a great opportunity for us to share, right? Stability and the mobility and the flexibility, for me, the disposition and the lifestyle, those are really two important factors. And whether or not you're integrating the stability training or the mobility training into your client's lifestyle. So for example, I have one client, he's in his mid-60s. He is a doctor and he's very active. He does spin class, but he has always a tight lower back. And I believe this spinning is contributing to that because of those hip flexion that's repetitive. So what we do is we focus on the mobility aspect for him. But on the other hand, I have another client that is 69 years old and a male, and he has balance issues. So we focus on the stability and the core training. So, yes, they go hand in hand, but it also depends on the client's needs.
Okay, and determining those client needs. Do you specifically ask questions? Do you watch the range of motion? Do you do assessments with each training session, or do you do an assessment possibly quarterly? How do you determine that, Demetrius?
Well, I'm glad you asked that because I just wrote some information on assessments. And so basically it's a great way to motivate. So you have to establish some goals through the assessment. So in this instance, the flexibility assessment is one way to motivate the client to continue on. And so, but to answer your question, I kind of do what someone mentioned earlier, and that is that have them do the same kind of uniform warm up, and I watch them. But at the same time, I believe that that including just flexibility all the time in every workout is kind of the way I run things for my clients. So for example, towards the end, we do some dynamic stretching, and then we do some static stretching. And so I really don't necessarily have a fixed date or time for these assessments, but I do, on the other hand, make sure that I mention to them, hey, you've gotten a few degrees more out of this hamstring stretch, and this way they realize that all the work they put in is paying off.
And how do you do the dynamic flexibility work? Like, let's say we're talking about the hips.
Great, no, that's great. Yeah, and that's exactly what I do. So I have them in a supine position, and I usually give them a strap of some sort, and we flex the right hip, we raise the right leg up, and then we put a band or strap around that foot, and then we do literally each client that I have, which is not many, I have about 8 clients, and we lift that leg repeatedly over and over again for 10 times, then we hold it up. And usually during that process, they gain a few degrees of movement or flexibility. And then we also integrate the other parts of that hip, like a little bit of IT band stretching and a little gracilis and so forth. So we do that for the dynamic stretching all the time. And I also sometimes use the rotation, so we'll do some, since I teach Pilates, we do some dynamic rotation usually during the workout so that we can increase that mobility in the transverse plane.
Oh, and that's great. That's great. Pete, what I was thinking, Demetrius, is when somebody's lying on their back, supine position, and they've got a strap, or let's say yoga strap or whatever around their foot, and they elevate it. Pete, what I was wondering is, what do you think of PNF stretching, of the proprio-neuromuscular facilitation stretching? It was really big several years ago, and are people still using it now?
It could be, it's like anything else. It could be a useful tool if you know how to apply it correctly. And it can be somewhat challenging to teach somebody how to do it by themselves, like the whole contract, relax, about what Demetrius is talking about, hold the leg in an extended position. And you're actually using contraction of the quadriceps to allow lengthening of the hamstrings. It can be a great tool if you're using it with a client to help the client feel better. But I've really become a much bigger fan of percussion guns and the massage guns, percussion guns, whatever you want to call them, for being able to get that kind of momentary range of motion. Because that's the thing. I mean, it all comes down to however you manipulate the tissue. For the most part, it's only momentary, and you either need to use the range of motion that you just gained, or it's going to go away again.
Yeah. And some of the research, it was pretty similar to foam rolling. The benefits are short term. Have they discovered that any of the benefits from the percussion, Andrea, have they found that it's long standing?
Well, what I wanted to jump in and say as we're talking about this conversation, it used to be that when we thought of flexibility, we thought of only stretching. And that's where these next pieces come into. And what I try and tell people, I'll do lectures on flexibility, and I'll say, okay, who in the crowd here can't touch their toes? And there'll be one person who's like 6 inches from the floor, and they don't have a back injury, so don't worry about that forward flexion. But then I'll get them on the ground. And for 3 minutes while I'm talking about flexibility training and how we need to rethink about stretching and strengthening, they are in a hip bridge. Then they stand up, and miraculously, they can touch their toes. And they're like, how did this happen? It's like Helen Keller, I can see again. What we have to understand is that when we have energy moving through the body, and that's all that muscle tone is. Muscle tone is energy within the muscle. And the more that we work out, the more that energy stays in there. The more we don't work out, the energy starts to deplete and we get into an atrophy state. So the more that we put in the heat, the percussion gun, the myofascial release, the more pliable tissue is, the more tissue will move. If we leave the tissue out in the sun like OJ's glove, it will shrink and tighten and you won't be able to move. So flexibility training is all about movement, and it's really not just about stretching. And that's why when Pete said the percussion sounds, I'm like, yes, when you get a client on the table and you do a little of this kind of, we'll call it massage work with the guns, because they think it's amazing, all of a sudden, every movement after that starts to become more free. But tomorrow when they wake up, they're not going to have that same movement unless they continue with it. So it's all about the energy within the muscle.
And Pete, you're nodding and you're touching body parts, and please share with us. Yeah, we don't want to know what's going beyond the, whatever.
Oh,
but,
I'm doing that charade. She's on the, but she has it.
I'm on the notes. I know.
Yeah, that's from charades. But
I know. But what, you obviously very strongly agreed with that. Is there a lot of research that follows up that all these benefits are short term?
Yes, in short, if you do static stretching, what you're doing is you're ultimately telling the muscle to relax and lengthen, which is why it's not recommended before activity. There are protocols where you can static stretch a muscle, then move it through the range of motion, and you're trying to enhance the fire off the nervous system. And that really is that's where I've landed on it over the years, where if you want to improve flexibility, go through a dynamic warm-up. Your flexibility will change immediately within 10 to 12 minutes of a dynamic warm-up. And that can include walking lunges, walking hurdle steps, leg kicks, because anything, if you're relatively cold now, any type of movement, I'm sure Andrea and Demetrius both agree with this, is if you're cold now, any type of movement, I love the way Andrea put it, you're putting energy into the tissue, and energy in the tissue is going to cause the tissue to be able to lengthen and move. But then once you're cold again, it's just going to come back and stay in that static position. So it's always transitory. It's just how do you use it.
And Demetrius, Meg asked a question. She said, what are your thoughts on assisted stretching?
Yeah, I saw that. And yes, assisted stretching, I believe, is good to a certain extent. And that is that if you are, and I guess what she meant by assisted stretching is that PNF style where someone is actually assisting you, facilitating the stretch. That's where we're going, right? I'm guessing that's what she means by that. So this is good. This allows the client to relax to a certain extent because they're having the work kind of facilitated for them, and they don't have to work as hard per se because someone is manually facilitating this process of this joint mobility. On the other hand, if we're talking about functional fitness, then having anyone outside yourself is not going to be the most functional, if I can use the same word, the most practical route. So stretching on your own, dynamic stretching, some static stretching, mobility exercises, all of that are going to be the most beneficial because you are asking yourself to do it and no one to help you through that process. So yeah, there's a place for it. Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I agree with you. It's interesting because when you're doing the PNF, you push against the against the, like if this is my leg and this is the band and I'm laying back here and I'm pushing, trying to push my leg down. And then I kind of relax the muscle and then assist as the trainer, I can assist and push the leg back, stretching out that hamstring. You've, as Andrea put it, and as Pete supported, it feels like you're putting energy, you're contracting the muscle, pushing blood into it, heating it up, and then you release the muscle and just let the tissue stretch. And it's a wonderful way to stretch. What I also think about this, how does this work with yoga? Now, we didn't talk about this before, but I think about this with yoga because we're doing very strong, intense movements with yoga. And then we also have yin yoga, yin and yang, all right? You have that yin yoga where it's just, you're totally relaxed out and just relaxing into the stretch. Is that because the muscles get contracted through just day-to-day tension and children and work, And then suddenly you're able to relax the body, and it actually helps with your flexibility. Any thoughts on that?
I can jump in
Andrea,
onto that.
yes, please.
When I think of traditional yoga, for every movement, there's an opposite movement, which is part of that push and pull, which is the strengthening part. That's why up dog to down dog feels so good, because in down dog, I'm stretching the hamstrings, my hip flexors are shortened, my shoulders are lengthening. And up dog, now I'm squeezing the glutes, opening the hip flexor. So my hip flexor was closed and my hip flexor's open. And I continue through that process. And you notice that we spend more time in a down dog position in a traditional yoga class than in an up dog. Why is that? Because we need to strengthen the stability of the hamstrings. And when we take it into a single leg dog, or we push it through into warrior one, we're changing which muscles become dominant. Traditional yoga aerobics classes are going to be more forward quad stepping, lunges, squats. We get the opposite. Going into the yin yoga, remember we talked about that energy through the muscle. When we are tense, when we have high cortisol levels, when we are stressed out, when we lower the cortisol levels by going into the breath and just laying down, the energy changes throughout the body. So now the muscles are in a relaxed state, they're more pliable. So yes, we feel more flexible. We're not any flexible getting to the splits as we were the day before, but the joint has relaxed and almost reset. And one more thing that I love to talk about too is in the morning when we were born, our babies did a stretch. Our dogs do a stretch. We lost the natural reflex to reset the muscle tension in the body. Nobody does this. I got to do this in the morning. Like rarely do we see people reset the spine and the muscle tension. But by doing that simple movement, the whole day flows different because I've put energy through the body. I've reset the muscle tension to where it's naturally supposed to be, which is the anatomical position. And, you know, it just feels good. So that's my thought.
That's interesting. I have to, I hear you with this, because I used to get up and stretch. Now what I do is I get up and I go, okay, what's going to hurt today? You know, I mean, like,
or I look at my phone. I look at my phone right away. I bend over, I look at my phone, my tension goes up, the cortisol levels go up, the body tightens, goes into protective mode. We got to do this.
Yeah, definitely stretch. Pete, what do you, when I was listening to Andrea speaking, she was emphasizing that in yoga, we end up doing more downward dog. I see that a lot. I have to be honest with you. I do far more extensions as a yoga instructor than I think a lot of my compatriots, you know. I really believe in the extensions because I'm like right here, I'm sitting in a chair. I end up sitting in a chair most of my day. And I know, Pete, you have a standing desk and you're always standing. So
this is actually the first time in the number of times I've done this. I'm actually sitting for this, but I am sitting at a bar stool at my standing desk. No, the one thing I'd like, the two things I'm gonna add on to Andrea, and I was exactly thinking the same thing, is one of the benefits about yoga is in terms of flexibility is the breath work is in the balance between sympathetic drive and parasympathetic drive. Because when we start exercising, we fire off the sympathetic nervous system. That's our adrenaline, that's our cortisol, which produces the energy for our muscles to work. And we forget about the fact we just need to breathe sometimes to get oxygen into the tissue. And that can really, and I've only just, I don't purport to be an expert on breath work by any stretch of the imagination, but it totally makes sense to me to have a concentrated effort on breath work in an effort to pump O2 into the muscle, get the CO2 out and relax. Then finally, what I love about yoga, and this is kind of tough to talk about in two-dimensional, is if you're doing a single leg and you're pushing your foot into the ground, like in a tree, for example, that act of pushing your foot or hand into the ground is actually critical for flexibility. Because if you're pushing your arm into the ground, you're going to get more range of motion out of the shoulders. So if you're pushing your hand down, if you're pushing your foot into the ground, you're going to get more range of motion from the opposite hip. It's something called the cross extensor reflex, where contraction on one side of the joint, whether it's the hip or the shoulder, is going to allow for greater range of motion on the opposite side of the joint. And just the times I've done yoga, to me, they hit the nail on the head. And when they created this 5,000 to 7,000 years ago, they knew what they were doing in terms of how it manipulated the tissues and the joints of the body. because that can really, pushing one hand into the ground or pushing one foot into the ground is really one of the tricks to opening up through the tissues and the joints that just often aren't really highlighted in a class, at least in the classes I've been in.
And what about, okay, we're diving into yoga, which of course we weren't like, but when you're talking about range of motion, everybody thinks of flexibility, and immediately they also think of that yoga's coming in. What about hot yoga? What about the being working on flexibility in a warmer environment, Pete? How does that help? Is it longer term, shorter term? Does it even matter if it has a term?
Just because you can does not mean you should, in my opinion. I mean, could there be a benefit from hotter yoga? Sure, you're gonna heat the tissue can become more pliable, but we don't want our ligaments. I mean, our ligaments are not designed to be pliable. Our ligaments are not designed to stretch. And some of the stuff I've read about hot yoga is if you do it repeatedly, then you can get laxity out of the ligament. So you can create some movement in joints in the body that aren't designed to have that much movement. For example, the SI joint, the sacroiliac joint. So it's one of those things of where there might be some benefits to hot yoga. Again, when it comes to mobility, it's transitory, because as soon as the tissue gets cold, you're going to lose that range of motion. And if the tissue is not hydrated, if it becomes dehydrated because it's been overheated for too long, that's going to really put you in a much worse state to begin with. So I think hot yoga creates perception of doing more, but really it's not long-term benefits I don't think are there. I might be wrong though, but I don't know.
Andrea, hold on one second, please. Demetrius, I was going to ask you, what are your thoughts on the stretching in a warmer environment, stretching, heating the body up before you exercise to be in a cooler environment?
Well, I just think of this principle of specificity. So if you're going to train in a cool, did you say you're going to do some warm up for a different, like in one environment and then go into another environment? Is that what you said, Sara?
No. I'm wondering that is, we heat the body up to stretch. Mm-hmm. Does being in a warmer environment such as hot yoga, does that help with the flexibility? I think Pete really kind of clarified a few things, but I was wondering what your thoughts might be on that.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Well, for one thing, my opinion is I can't do anything in hot hell yoga. That is just
hot. We're not supposed to swear. Sean Seneca.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Well, okay.
No, it's okay. It's a technical term. Hot hell yoga. Yeah, I've read that several places. Probably in Shape magazine.
So sorry, but I just know that for me, this is probably a little bit not necessary, perhaps. I believe it's more of a branding thing. This is just my opinion, but you're asking me what the functionality of the whole thing is. And I believe, yes, okay, the joints do need to be warm to get that pliability and that elasticity. However, that warmth is, again, something that you're creating on your own. You are not looking outside for the warmth. You are trying to create the warmth on your own inside the joints. This is going to be the most practical way to approach stretching, because everyone was saying, that you can't necessarily maintain this type of heated situation. And so you're going to have a diminishing returns if you can't seem to find another hot place to get a good stretch. So what if you can't find a hot yoga? Are you not able to get a good stretch? Well, you could if you practice in a normal environment all the time and increase your flexibility in that way, as opposed to going to a place to get more flexibility. So yeah, I think there's a place for it, but I just think that it's not necessary. Yeah.
Andrea, you had a comment. I hope you didn't forget it.
Well, it goes back just a couple to Pete talking about the breath work, and we had talked a little bit about the breath work, and I try and this is my thought pattern on breath, so it's not documented anywhere, but when we go from the sympathetic to the parasympathetic central nervous stem on the thought of breathing and being conscious in my breath, I feel like that frees up a little space of all the mechanisms that the body has to remember on what to do to stay alive. When I think about the breath and I'm focused on the breath. And I think that that shift in the mindset is what helps us to relax as well. Going into the heated part, on the heat, you know, we have to remember when we go into a hot room of 104 degrees, and depending on how it's hot, if it's hot heat, infrared heat, or just the temperature turned up, blood pressure also is increased, heart rate's also increased. And so we have some things that are naturally kind of elevating the energy system in our body, not necessarily to a positive space. And when we think about places where we put the extra stress on the body and then go into a strength training, because most of the hot yoga isn't just, I mean, when we go to we'll go to the quintessential Bikram space. This is not a slow moving, easy, light vinyasa flow. There's strength and there's work going on during this. So, you know, hot or cold, I don't think it's something you should be practicing on a regular basis. As it feels good to you. I know it felt good at 30. In my 50s, I really don't enjoy it as much anymore. I actually feel the change in my blood pressure and I'm tuned into it differently. So, you know, but if it's getting somebody to the gym and they're doing it more regularly and staying active, I'd rather have them do that than do nothing.
Yeah. Interestingly enough, Baron Baptiste used to teach hot yoga. And every time I was at QVC in Philadelphia, I'd go and take his class. So I would make sure I was like the last person to walk in the room so I could be by the door. And it was so hot in that room. Like I literally like would suck under the door to get some cool air. And I remember once I kind of looked around and I kind of popped the door a little bit. Oh my God, I got screamed at. And I thought, but I'm working out, I'm getting great flexibility and I can't breathe. Yeah. Now, the stress of that, you know, we do want to work towards an anaerobic threshold to strengthen the heart and the lungs and the efficiency of the cardiovascular system. So whatever air I get in, my body has to work harder to actually utilize that air, you know, in my body. So I become more efficient. So when I'm in a comfortable environment, you know, my breath can be a little bit more shallow. My heart slows down. I'm a little healthier. So this challenge it's that fine line. Is it healthy to challenge the body in this manner? Is it necessary? I'm always thinking of activities of daily living. According to Kenneth Cooper, I just was at IRSA, the International Health and Racquet Sports Association convention. It was a fabulous conference in Dallas, and Dr. Cooper was talking, and it's fascinating because you do not have to be at this high level of fitness. All we have to do to help with longevity and just general health and activities of daily living is a moderate fitness level. You know, these extreme workouts that we put ourselves through, what really is the benefit? And I look at that. We want to push the body because it makes it healthier and able to deal with the stress of day-to-day life. But what are the long-term benefits? So I'm going to go back to Demetrius. How often or how much should you program mobility and flexibility into your workout routine? You know, we used to go, okay, I'm going to do 5-minute warm up, but when I hit the age of 50, I'm going to extend it to a 10-minute warm up, you know, that's a dynamic warm up. And then I'm going to have my flexibility, my more flexibility and mobility work at the end of the workout because my body is hot. How do we measure that? How often? How much?
It goes back to, Sara, the fitness level, I believe. And so if you are dealing with someone that is a beginner, and we can go by the ACSM or the NASM or any one of those as governing bodies, they say that, okay, the persons that are beginners, 2 days a week with a little bit of everything is where you start, and you kind of increase that, and the scale goes up according to your experience and your fitness ability. So, so if I speak from personal experience, I have clients that have been with me for 6 years, 5 years, 3 years. And so they are used to the standard dynamic warm up at the very beginning. And you're specifically asking about the programming. So I'm addressing that. And then at the end, or in the middle of the workout, so if we're talking about an hour, in the middle, I sneak in a balance and I sneak in another flexibility exercise. And again, that would be, and in that instance, it's either static or dynamic. And at the very end, we do our post stretches, which is a combination of static and dynamic also. So again, I base it on and also the frequency. So I base it on, if I see the client several days a week, then we can do the flexibility less. But if I see them a few days a week, then we'll do flexibility a little bit more. And then again, I base the inserts of the flexibility on what their fitness level is. So there are different ways to think about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. And Andrea, what I love about the chat box is we're talking about people who are hungover. Very key, and the professionalism is just
that is the
right
ultimate dehydrated person, is someone who's been drinking. And they are the most prone when they come in for the workout to tear something, to roll something. Their brain's not functioning well and their body's not functioning well. So the question was about, is it really important to be hydrated? And because the tissues we're talking about are mostly made up of water, yes. I think Tiger Woods coined the phrase, hydrate to concentrate. And it's one of the key things I always think about. If you aren't drinking enough water, you can't lose weight, you can't work out as easily, and you're not as smart. That's it.
What do you really think?
I just told you.
I know. Pete,
I can't sit still either. I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's good. Pete, you were nodding your head, and
well, no, I mean, that's important. And a lot of times we forget that the more important tissue is the fascia and connective tissue, and all that. When you look between the layers of tissue, that if you're well hydrated, the wears slide across one another very easily, like sheets of plastic or sheets of rubber. But if you're not well hydrated, then think about the layers of tissue sliding across one another like sandpaper or like Velcro. They're just not going to be as efficient. And so that's where hydration is critical for this concept of mobility, in terms of being able to use your tissues and develop force from your muscles.
And it's interesting. We actually did a whole webinar on hydration, and what was fascinating is that a lot of people said that we need some salt in our water. We need to make sure we're not just drinking this water. And what are your thoughts on that, Pete?
Well, no, I mean, sodium, sodium, magnesium, potassium, all the electrolytes, they just help. What they do is they help the tissues absorb water that much easier. And you could drink the chemicals and the sugar and whatnot in Gatorade, but by putting a little bit of sodium and a little bit of non-processed sugar in your water, you get basically the same thing.
Just a pinch of salt and just a couple of drops of honey. It's not, I think we get sometimes confused too, because too much sodium is going to dehydrate the body as well.
Right.
Well, anything in fitness. I mean, I've been using this for the last couple of weeks. Anything in fitness is baby bear, because if you do too much, you become Papa Bear. If you do too little, you become Mama Bear, and it doesn't have an effect. So we're all looking for our own baby bear, whether it's flexibility, whether it's strength, or whether it's anything else. You're just looking for baby bear. That's what you're doing, Sarah. You're searching for baby bear. There's the name of your next conference series.
I feel the name of a workshop coming on. That's what I'm feeling from you guys. So I think, Andrea, you touched on this a little bit. How can you use strength training to increase range of motion?
Tight muscles are typically weak muscles. So if I don't have the hip mobility I want, I'm probably going to need to strengthen those hip rotators and the hip stabilizers. And I think that's, if we think about how the body moves forward all day long, if you just focus on the backside training, you're going to get more front mobility. If you want to do the side mobility, you're going to have to focus on the opposing side. So, we kept putting it into buckets as cardiovascular training, strength training, flexibility training. And we always said flexibility is the stretching part. And I think I saw somebody saying, do you do the stretches at the end after the core? correct me if I'm wrong, and Pete will probably be able to chime in on this, or even Demetrius. There was a time, I feel like in the mid 90s, that we did the best improvements in strength, where we went through our 3 sets of strength, and then we stretched afterwards, and the recovery was faster, and the strength builds were faster as well. And then we learned that it wasn't just the stretch or the static stretch, because that slowed down the Golgi tendon and the muscle reaction, but it was dynamic stretch that we needed to do. And to me, a lot of movement is dynamic stretch, and a lot of strengthening movements are dynamic. So if you can just kind of, instead of thinking like, I do my cardio warm up, I do my strength training, I do my stretching, is how these all are fluid and they move together, you're going to have a much better workout. And that's where I think functional training kind of came in with, we do bear crawls, we do lunges, we do rotationals, or we do the Gary Gray matrix that came up the last time I was on here. If we go back to some of those really simple ideas of movement, we're going to hit it on the head.
Yeah, you know what? I can't even believe it. We're almost out of time here. So if I were asking you, Pete, give me a couple statements closing regarding range of motion, what we need to know.
Well, I'm just going to say what she said, but in reality, honestly, every exercise is a mobility exercise, because anytime you're exercising, anytime a joint is moving, you get a range of motion, right? If my shoulder is moving, some muscles are lengthening, some muscles are shortening. So if you take a meta look at it, then any exercise is a range of motion exercise. So you would just want to do the mobility of what your workout's going to be that day. And if you're going to be doing a higher intensity workout, you probably need a few more mobility exercises to warm up. If your workout isn't going to be that high of an intensity, then the mobility exercises could be the warm up. It really is. I'm going to come back to this concept of it's transitory from workout to workout, depending on what you get out of it, what you put into it.
Great. And Demetrius, what do you think is a great concept for what we need to know regarding range of motion?
I think that we all have to consider that we're getting older by the second. So we probably, should, stretch and be as active as possible. I was actually doing some reading on a study about the metabolism and how there was once known as the age and the metabolism. They were kind of coinciding, but really this particular article I was reading was saying that you just keep yourself moving. You keep yourself active, and then no matter how old you are, the metabolism will take care of itself. It will probably slow down, it will slow down, but it will also depend on how much you work out. But as far as the range of motion is concerned, I would say to rate it on a perceived exertion scale. So when you are working out, when you do your cardio, you are thinking low intensity, mid intensity, high intensity. So why can't and why shouldn't you apply that to flexibility training? Especially if you're on a progressive type of program. If you want to get better, then you want these stretches to feel more like a 7, 8, or a 9 on the scale of 1 to 10. Unless you're not interested in that, maybe you just want to be on the maintenance program and the stretch to feel mild. So I would say always progress yourself along, use the intensity that you need so that you're gaining flexibility every time that you stretch.
Very interesting. And Andrea, what would be your closing?
I want to know what this 90-90 shin box hip lift is that Meg said. Is that where do I have my knees both bent and then I'm going to lift something? I'm confused. Where is she? Is she can she show us her video?
You drop them down. You would sit with your legs in front of you, drop them down side to side. So if you're sitting like Indian style with your legs in front of you. Yeah, where you drop both legs to one side and the other.
The shin box. Got it. I didn't know what it was called. There's actually a name for that. Thank you for bringing that up. I like that one too. My closing is, we're all here to try and share what we know and inspire other people to get moving. And just by each of you being here tonight is just such a gift. And I'm so grateful to be part of it. And Sara, you've been doing this for years and years. I've been watching you. And I just so appreciate what you've done for the industry. And for all of us on here, you bring us together. You give so much for free. And I think we all need to, like I said, support each other. Thank you.
Well, you guys are the best. So now
Here.
we're going to get going. We got a great Dallas Mania coming up November 5th through 7th, which we are very excited to be bringing to you guys. We are really excited to be able to bring you guys live conferences. We just had Midwest Mania. It was wonderful. We're doing Dallas Mania. We're having, believe it or not, on-site free COVID testing, the rapid test, 5 minutes. I love it. I love it. We're opening up. We're doing it safely. It's exciting. So I want to thank you all for joining me. Sean Sennigan, thank for herding us cats and keeping us together. Thank you, Andrea. I think we lost Pete. And thank you, Demetrius. We'll see you guys later. Have a great evening.
Thanks, you guys.